this part of our tutorial, we're going to access a character array using a for loop, and we're going to do it in iOS. So we're just going to have a loop that will iterate through each element in the array, and it will print out the specified element. So first we'll have to create the array, and then in order to be able to print it to our phone screen, we're going to have to convert each element to a string, and then append them all together. So in the end, we'll have one word that consists of basically all of the characters in the array. Okay, so now we've seen a couple of for loops in action. One dealt with integers and the other dealt with strings. Now we're going to feed in an array into a for loop. Now arrays and for loops go very, very well together. If we want to access multiple elements of an array, a for loop is maybe one of the best ways to do it, rather than calling each access specifically. So let's say we have an array, and let's use a character array this time. So here we go, it's a character array. Let's call this Mammoth, and you know what's going to go in there, I'm sure. So we're going to have an M, an A, M, O, T, and H. Okay. So now we have our array set up. Remember, there are two ways we can do this. We can do it this way, or we can be specific by calling new character array of length 7, or whatever we choose. But again, this part right here, this new character with 7 in brackets, is redundant. We don't need it. So I'm going to take it out. Okay, so here's our array. It's character array Mammoth, and it contains these characters. So basically Mammoth spelled out in characters. Alright, now let's create our loop. So again, we'll do it in the viewDidLoad. And this is in iOS, whereas in Android it would be the onCreate. Okay, so we'll set it up. We have our for. We'll start at I equals 0, and we'll run until the length. So that is 7. We know it's 7 characters long, and we're going to increase I by 1 each time. Alright, so again we could do I++ instead of I equals I plus 1, but I'm just going to leave it as is for now. Okay, so what we're going to do is we want to access an element of this array. So do you remember how to do that? We do this. So we call the array name, and then the element, the index of the element we want to access. So remember, arrays start at 0, at index 0, so this is index 0, index 1, index 2, up until index number 6, but this is element 1, element 2, up until element 7. I know it's a little confusing and a little counterintuitive, but I'm afraid that's just the way that C# is written. Okay, so before when we wanted to access an array element, we would call the specific index. So let's say we wanted to access the first one, we'd call 0, the second one we'd call 1, the last one in this case we would call 6, and that would give us the last character, which is an H. This time we want to access each character as the for loop iterates. So at the first iteration we want to access the first character, the second iteration when I equals 1 we'll access the second character, third iteration when I equals 2 we'll access the third character, and so on and so forth. Now rather than doing this, Mammoth of 0, Mammoth of 1, rather than doing that 7 times, which would be horribly repetitive and a waste of time, what we're going to do is we're going to put in I here. And the reason we're doing that is because we're calling the index of the element that corresponds with the current count of I. Okay, so when I equals 0, we're going to be accessing Mammoth of 0. When I equals 1, which will be the second iteration, we'll access Mammoth of 1. When I equals 2, we'll access Mammoth of 2, and so on and so forth, up until the very end. So by the end of this loop, we'll have accessed all 7 elements. Now, I could print these to the console and display them down here, but it's a little hard to see and there's a lot of other writing. So instead I'm going to create a string that will contain all of these characters and then print it in our simulator. So the way I'm going to do that is I'll first create a string. Let's call this string mammoth string, and we're going to leave it blank for now. Well, blank up here anyway. We're not going to initialize it. We're going to give it the values down here. So we're going to say mammoth string equals mammoth string, so whatever the mammoth string currently is, plus the element, and we're going to convert that to a string. So I know there's a lot going on right now, and we could remove this redundant toString, but we're not going to. We're just going to keep it there. So yeah, like I said, there's a lot going on right now, so I'll try and go through this and explain it slowly again. So with each iteration, we saw this kind of a thing happening last time where we had a string and we added another string onto what already existed with each iteration. So we understand that part. But so consider this as just being another string that we're adding. So remember last time we were just adding hello 5 times. This time, instead of adding the same thing, we're going to access an element in the array with each iteration, and it's going to be each time it will access the next element, convert that to a string, and then stick it all together. Okay, and then we want to be able to display it, so we'll have to do text. This is in iOS, so it's label, and we're going to do mammoth string, and we don't need the toString because it's already a string. Okay, so before we run this, just want to recap again. So the first iteration will take the now blank string and add the first character. So this will be mammoth of 0 because I equals 0. So that will add the m to a blank string, so we'll convert the m to a string and add it to the string. The second iteration, where I will be 1, we're going to take whatever's in mammoth string, which is just an m for now, and we're going to access the array, the second element of the array, which is at position 1, going to convert it to a string and stick it onto the end, and so on and so forth, until eventually we've gone through every element of this array, converted them to strings, and stuck them all together. So let's go ahead and run it so we can actually see it printed out. We don't want the Android one, we want the iPhone one. Okay. So we will run with the iPhone 5S again. And so at the end of this, we should have this nice string that consists of all of these characters converted to strings and stuck together. And do we guess it? Yes, we do. So we have mammoth being printed out here. Now, again, this is because with each iteration of the loop, we're accessing the element at the index, so the index I, that corresponds with the current count of I. So again, if I was on count 0, which is the very first count, we're accessing the element at index 0. If I is on 5, for example, we're accessing the element at index 5, and so on and so forth. Now, if we want to put some spaces there, we can do lots of things with this. We can put some spaces, so if we want, we can do this, put a space in between each element, and we can run that. And see, it will just print out the same thing as before, but with spaces between each letter. And there we go, see? So we get mammoth with spaces, we can put commas if we want, we can put slashes, but I just want to demonstrate basically going through and printing out a character array. Because it's a very important thing. If we want to, whereas a string could be something very simple, it contains the entire word, like this, and it's one unit and we can print it out easily as one unit. In order to print out a character array, this is kind of what you have to do. You have to use a loop, and generally, for example, if we were going to print to the console, we would generally do something like this. System.console.writeLine, and then we would have the elements, so in this case it's mammoth of I. So again, if we were printing to the console, this is what we would do. So with each iteration, it would just print out the corresponding character, and then by the end we just have all of the characters side by side. Okay, so that's pretty much how you would print out a character array, and there's lots of things you can do with this. You can change the elements of the array if you want, and that's actually what we're going to be looking at next, is modifying each element in the array with our for loop. In this part of the tutorial, we accessed a character array using a for loop in iOS and printed out elements. So we first created a character array that contained the word mammoth, with each letter representing a different character. And we printed them out using the loop. So we fed the array into the for loop, and instead of accessing an element of the array that is numbered, so for example, if our array was called mammoth, instead of calling mammoth1, mammoth2, etc., we just called the mammoth with the index that the current index that the loop is on. So for example, we just used mammoth with the I in the square brackets rather than a number, so that with each iteration of the loop, it's printing out the element at the index specified by the count of the loop. Okay, so I know it's a little complicated, but the video should have made that clear. So by now we should be able to access and print the elements of an array using a for loop. So we've looked at character arrays, and now we're going to be looking at integer arrays.